Дорогие друзья, давайте начинаем занимать свои места, и мы потихонечку начинаем наше мероприятие, на которое все собрались. Меня зовут Наташа, я представляю «Стрелку» здесь, и совместно с посольством Великобритании и нашими коллегами из Create London мы проводим совместные лекции, которые и проведут наши коллеги сейчас. Я не буду задерживать ваше время. Все ли получили устройство для синхронного перевода? Если кто-то еще не получил, то вы можете это сделать в зале. И у нас будет лекционная часть, а после этого часть вопросов и ответов. Поэтому спасибо, что вы пришли, и начинаем. Я представляю Диану и Эдриана, которые и расскажут вам о их методике работы.
Hello. Hi. Thank you, Natasha. My name is Édrian Gэрrard. I'm the founding director of Create London.
And I'm Diana Ebanьes Lopes. I head up the build projects and policy-based urbanism ones.
It's a real pleasure to be with you today in Pam. We've had a really good couple of days and we're enjoying working with artists and activists and people from the Municipal Council, and we're halfway through a 2-day workshop, so this is a nice time for us to tell you a little bit about our practice and talk you through some of the projects that we've been working on for the past 10 years. This is our home, so we are based at the Barbican Centre, which is in the City of London. All of our work is outside of the Barbican Centre in East London, primarily. One of the reasons we're based here is that we work with the Barbican Centre, which is a really significant cultural centre for London, and we bring their programming out of this building and into communities in the east of London, which have limited access to places like the Barbican. This came about, our organisation came about 10 years ago, and this year is our birthday year, and it's nice to be in another country talking about what we do. We began in the context of some research that I was doing when I was working for a municipal council looking at participation in culture in the East End of London. The East End is one of Europe's biggest cultural quarters, with something like 14,000 artists living and working, 100 art galleries, lots of theatres, cinemas, but with very, very low access to culture, publicly funded culture, with the communities that live in East London. So if you live in East London, you're less likely to go to a theatre or an art gallery than if you lived in anywhere else in the whole of the UK. And all of our work is looking at why that is, and what relationships we can build between the art community in the City of London and people living locally. This is one of our first projects. So underneath the motorway, on the fringes of the Olympic Park, a group called Assemble, who are a group of architects and artists, were given their first commission by us to build this structure here, and Diana was part of the project. She's in that photograph somewhere, see if you can find her. So Assemble, this was situated on the fringes of the Olympic Park. Now the Olympic Park took 4.5 years to build, and they put a big blue fence all around the park, and this was just on the cusp of that, just on the cusp of the fence. And the people that lived in this area, this is an area called Hackney Wick, felt very disconnected from the Olympics. There were no free tickets, there was a lot of disruption, a lot of building work, a lot of dust and dirt, and so we thought it would be a nice thing to do a temporary intervention in this neighbourhood, and this became quite a famous project in some ways. It was going to be in this place for 2 months, and it ended up being there for 4 months, and they had something like 25,000 visitors to this. And this was a cinema and a cafe, and it was built from wood, and it was built by volunteers, 200 volunteers.
Over about a month. So there was a month of events, which was the skills to build a house in an entirely new way, kind of drilling through the bricks and then stringing them together in particular patterns and then lifting them up to someone who would hang them from the top. The other thing that's not very visible here are the relationships that it took to get this going. So there wasn't much of a budget. The wood was donated or part donated. The whole design of the structure was based on the kind of materials that Assemble could get hold of. And then there was also a relationship with the British Film Institute, who could provide the film programming that was then the big ticket event.
So all of the work that we do with artists and architects is outside of cultural spaces, traditional cultural spaces, and where people live. And this was one of the early projects that we did. This is another project that we did in the course of the build-up to the London Olympic Games. We did something like £4 million of commissions, and this was a commission by a British artist called Jeremy Deller, who won the Turner Prize. Actually, Assemble also won the Turner Prize. So we work with really super ambitious artists to do things with people.
About this image, I'd say that it seems much less permanent than the first, but actually is much more so. It's still travelling around the world, and it's reached a lot more people. So off the back of the Folly for a Flyover, the first project, there was a lot of questioning at Create about what's the legacy of the project. It can run for 3 months, it can become famous, but what happens next? The other thing I'd point out about this picture is that it's not me building it or me and my friends. It's people who work in parks, it's construction workers, it's security, and it's about working with the creation of art, and quite far-reaching pieces of work, but with a really broad range of people who wouldn't always be in the conversation.
So this was super popular, and it was, again, the early stages of our work, looking at how we could build audiences, how we could encourage participation in quite serious art projects around this time of this great big Olympic thing happening in London. This is a project where we worked with young people as tour guides to their area. So we worked with 2 artists to produce a series of very beautiful books. This is some pages from this book. In a stretch of land very near the Olympic site. And we had a really exciting time working with young people to describe the area that they lived. This led us in some ways to think about our work as very, very locally based, and this idea of local people being the experts in the areas that they live. We produced 3 tour guides, and we put them in these little metal boxes, and this is the Olympic Park. You can see the stadium there. And we called the guides the odd guides because the young people thought it's quite a strange place to live. It's got a really interesting history. The Olympic Park didn't come from space and land in an area of London that didn't have a history. It landed in a place with a very interesting industrial history, and a history of protest. And we worked with these young people for about 4 months to produce these guidebooks that became part of their experience of welcoming visitors to where they live. This was an area of protest, so where the Olympic Park was where there was a very famous factory that produced matches, and there was a strike. It was called the Match Girls Strike. So the women that worked in the factories went on strike, and this gave birth to the trade union movement in Britain. So it was a really significant area. So with these artists, and we worked with these young people, they did some reenactment of our protest, and we took them into central London. Now, one of the really significant things for the communities that we work with in the east of London is that many of them had never seen the River Thames before. Many of them had not seen Big Ben. Some of them didn't realise there was a river in London. So we did this process of working with artists, and we came up with some really surprising results that led us towards the production of not just a book, but some music as well. And love working with artists is that they will produce things that and this was in some ways a very surprising very positive experience for the young people that work with us. And I think it would be nice to play you a little bit of the music that we did. And we'll get the music with you. And one of the Bow, which is next to the Olympic Park, is where grime started. So it's where Dizzy Rascal is from, and in the tower blocks they made, basically it's the home of grime in the UK, which has become a really significant musical movement. And when we get the sound working,
there's a few of you of the groups from the workshop today who asked a very interesting question: what's the impact of a cultural quarter on the neighbourhood next to it? What's that connection point between the two? And also, what's the social ecology? What's the green ecology? So coming out of projects from the Olympic Park, I don't think Create would have known that it would have ended up creating great bouncy castles and ride tracks, but they all began with a very similar question to yours.
We can come back to it. Maybe we play it at the end, because it's quite a nice way to finish. It's okay, we'll come back to the end. We'll play at the end. This is one of the things that strikes us when we start projects, is that when we come to a place, we don't try and do place making. There's a culture with architecture and urbanism in the UK when they use this phrase place making, like they're making a place. We kind of find that phrase quite problematic, because places have always got their own histories, they've always got their own culture. And when we're thinking about, we want to engage young people in art, we want to bring young people into an art gallery, so well, young people have got their own culture, there's a culture everywhere, every place has got somewhere special. So this process that we went through with the young people was like looking at what their culture was, and their culture was grime, and we went with that. And that became a very significant cultural movement in the UK, and we integrated that into the project. During the Olympics, you weren't allowed to do any advertising if you were not Adidas, McDonald's, General Electric, Barclays Bank. So the Olympic Park you couldn't touch with advertising. It was really strictly controlled. So as soon as the Olympics finished, we invited 52 artists to make adverts for local shops, businesses, fish and chip restaurants, and we put them all over the park. And it was a really simple way of connecting artists with their local shops. So we invited 52 artists to talk to their favourite cafe, their favourite shop owner, and we plastered the whole of the Olympic Park. There were 2.5 kilometres of these hoardings all over the park. And I think one of the things we've been talking about today is how you create relationships between artists and other people. And in this case, other people were people that ran businesses. And this is actually, these are still there after 5 years. We did them with Dye Bond. This is the only project that we've taken internationally, because we were invited to go to Nigeria in Lagos, and we did a similar project in Lagos with big advertising hoardings all over the city. We don't bring the picture today, but one of the things we did is we got people selling pineapple on the side of the street in Lagos, and we invited an artist to make a 60-foot massive motorway hoarding advert for this single woman who sold pineapple, and she stood underneath it and sold it on that day, and it was there for 3 months. So we love to get artists, we like to bring artists into the world a little bit and do work that's really useful with people. This was one of our first projects that became permanent, and we were talking today about how do you sustain a project, how do you keep something going. This project was not designed to be permanent, and many projects are not designed to be permanent. The Eiffel Tower was not going to be permanent. The Millennium Wheel in London was not going to be permanent. It was there for the millennium, and it's still there. This is in Barking, which is in the far east of London. It's quite suburban. It's further out from Hackney or those kinds of places. And in 2011, it was voted the most unhappy place in Britain. And this was the year before the Olympics, and the Olympics were 5 kilometres away from this place. So we commissioned some architects and artists called Something and Son to make a bathhouse. And this is a bathhouse where you can come here for the day for £1, and it had a finished sauna, and it was a very beautiful building, and it had massage, and it had local practitioners offering services that you're very good at, I think, in this country, this kind of stuff. And it was going to be there for, it was on a temporary site, and they built this, and it was there for during the Olympics, and we had something like 9,500 people come in 6 weeks, and it was super popular, and it was a nice thing.
For context, you'd normally pay £40 as much to go, and you'd go into the centre of London to find a bathhouse. So there's a real democratisation of something that's already there, maybe is already available, but if you look at who goes to these bathhouses, maybe isn't available for 80% of the population. So the art here is partly the architecture, and it's also partly challenging the norms and the policies and what's expected of meanwhile use or temporary artworks, and providing something very simple.
So after the project finished, after this 6-week period during the Olympics where all these thousands of people were having treatments and having a nice time, the local community voted to put the bathhouse into the local library. So in a corner of a library in Barking you can have a sauna, you can have a massage, you can have treatment, and it became fully integrated, and after 5 years it's still going, which was a really happy thing for us. This is another bathhouse. This is a big 1930s building in Poplar. Poplar is closer to the centre of London. This building had been closed for 35 years, and in the lead up to the Olympics, we met a community that were campaigning to reopen this building and replace the swimming pool. So this was a swimming pool and a leisure centre that local people really wanted to reopen. So in 2012, we worked with the Frieze Art Fair. And we approached the local municipality and we said, okay, we know that the locks of this building have been on for 30 years, but we'd like to come in and do this temporary project with an artist called Anthea Hamilton. Anthea Hamilton just recently completed a big commission at Tate Britain, and she made these large-scale sculptures that we got into the municipal pool because the council were very impressed with frieze and it was all kind of posh art, and we said, that's terrific. We were really happy that we could work with the local community who were campaigning to open the pool, because after this project, the local council decided to spend something like £8.5 million to put the pool back in, and now the pool is back to where it started and it's completely open. So in a way, we kind of sneaked the community back into the building with art for a temporary exhibition, and it led to the building being reopened, which was a really happy conclusion.
It's worth saying in both cases the intention for longer term impact would have been there, but the agreements wouldn't have been. So choosing something that can signal a change and can suggest that a place is of value in a particular way and then letting go can also work. This is the Black Horse workshop. Black Horse is an address, it's a tube stop out northeast of London, with not a lot of stuff going on. And there the question was, what can we do here that has an even longer term impact, that a little bit like Barking Bathhouse also creates access to something, in this case a workshop, which might otherwise be very expensive, be limited to people with particular professional skills. The same applies to the kind of training you might need for woodwork, for welding. So this is a very nicely designed, again with Assemble, club-based workshop. So you can go there if you're local. It's also a lot cheaper. You can get trained in various levels of craft, of woodwork, of metalwork. I can't remember if they do casting. But you can also get a premium membership. If you're a designer or a freelance product designer and you can't afford your own workshop, which I don't think any can, then you can also have 24-hour access unsupervised, so you can also use it for professional work, which means that not only do you support two types of people interested in creative work who may not either be famous enough or connected enough with it to have their own access to it, but also it creates a working side by side between people that may not otherwise communicate.
So we were talking today about how do you sustain a project. So this project had something like £200,000 of public resource at the beginning, and after 2 years it has no public money at all. It survives entirely on the membership. So when we started this project we were quite worried because we were working in a very industrial part of the city, and this relied on members. It relied on people paying to use the facility. It was affordable, but we still had to get people through the door. So when we first opened, we were like, is anyone going to be interested in metalwork or woodwork in this industrial area? And 3 years later, we have something like 900, almost 1,000 members that use it. So it's absolutely full, and it is completely financially self-sustaining. We're now looking to expand the space to make it bigger, and it's become, you were saying the other day, it's become there's a real kind of tradition of making and craft in this part of London, but people are more and more interested in making stuff and learning skills, and this has become a template for lots of other kinds of projects like this.
So, for example, in meetings with the Greater London Authority, with the Mayor's Office, rather than referring to something like the Black Horse Workshop, they might say, we could do a Black Horse, which normally is reserved for big brands. It's really satisfying to see that because the model was different, it's not so much the making that's new, but it's the way of integrating community in a business model, which means that it can self-sustain, and that means that with a little bit of funding you can let go. Which we did. So we don't run this space anymore. We then take our time and our effort to looking for a new issue, a new need, a new opportunity, and then we try and work out something that's not been done before. What kind of model working with either government funding or charity funding or local community or volunteers, or with a way of understanding the space and its use that we've not seen before. What can we do? So with things like Black Horse and some others that you'll see in a minute, they're now independent charities or independent social enterprises. Disappear.
So in all of our projects, we try and find the value to a community. And for us, it's not enough just to have a facility that's helping people make craft, because that's nice, but it's okay. Socially, it's self-sustaining. So we spent like 3.5 years thinking about how to make this thing self-sustainable. But it's led us to be able to start education projects and to work with children locally who don't have access to craft and to making. The curriculum in the UK, the British government have systematically removed arts from the curriculum and removed craft and making, which used to be very much part of what children would learn at school. So the Black Horse Workshop is now doing quite a significant amount of teaching. It's working with local schools, and the facility is something that young people are able to access. So through making something sort of financially sustainable, we're now able to work with children who live in this part of London.
I like the transition between this image and the next, because both of them speak to an interest in play that's growing, about really being able to play with mud, to be out in nature. And then that was a project that followed on, kind of how can we take play and beyond making it educational and linked to a sort of increasingly missing world of craft, create an adventure playground in and around the houses where these children live, and working with their parents who trained as play workers, professional play workers, so they could supervise this space after school. It's also a place that works informally like a food bank, without saying we're giving you food because you don't have enough to eat. There's a fire is lit all entirely within the play and the training, and there are some fridges and a kitchen area where you can go and get food if you're playing there.
So this was a very bold decision by the City Council in Glasgow. So this was the first project that we did outside of London. And after the big sporting event in London of the Olympics, there was something called the Commonwealth Games, which you may know about, I don't know, it's an international sporting event in Glasgow. And the place where these kids lived was very close to the park. And we made a proposal to the City Council, the Municipal Council in Glasgow, because they had a competition for public art. And our application with Assemble, who we talked about earlier, was, we didn't make a proposal. We said, our proposal is to talk to the children who live to the park. And so we just said, we're going to talk to kids, and we're going to talk to parents, and we're going to work a proposal up with kids and parents. In the UK, there's a tradition of adventure playground, which is risk-free, risky play. So play in the mud, lighting fires. And it came about through after the Second World War, where there was a lot of bomb damage in London. Children would play in areas like this, where they're kind of derelict. And then in the 1950s, the parents would start helping their children a bit, get a little bit more organised, but still quite risky and quite exciting. And this became a way of play where you have facilitated playgrounds where kids who haven't got gardens, who wouldn't like get near mud or get near fire, are able to get in touch with nature. And they ended up designing a very beautiful park and a place that is now there for 99 years, that is staffed by the parents, as Diana was saying, of these children who became the play workers, and it's now got something like 800 children that use this little park most nights after school.
By contrast, big art commissions, especially by the state, and it's interesting that they, even without knowing how this would end up, they agreed method, and that the method included no professionals, hardly any adults.
Which is a very good example of a municipal authority taking a really big risk. And I think they only did it because we'd done all this work on the Olympics, and they thought, oh, Olympics, that's nice. So I think that gave them a sense of safety.
But it's also a suggestion of how to identify funding that doesn't look like it could provide, in this case, a very clear need that normally a large art commission wouldn't be able to meet. So look for strange partnerships.
This is a project by a German artist that we commissioned in 2013 called Katrin Baum. She's an artist that's very interested in the relationship between the city and the countryside around in Perm, and there seems to be an interesting relationship to the countryside around this part of Russia, so we'd include this today. This is an example of how we look at sustainability, how we get a project working for a long period of time, but also how we've worked with the municipal council to fund a project that's not coming from arts funding, but in this case from health funding. So these are a group of people who live in Dagenham, which is a part of London, again, suburban London on the east of the city. And these people they have memories of travelling to the countryside as children with their parents to work in the farms. Because up until the 1960s, something like 100,000, mainly women and children, would travel from London on trains down to Kent and Essex to pick, in this case, hops. These are hops that they're picking to make beer with, or other drinks, but they'd also pick the fruit, and it would be like a working holiday. And a lot of these people here were suffering from loneliness. They're all retired, they're living in the suburbs of London. There's limited infrastructure for them to meet each other. So Katrin proposed this project, which was to take them back to the fields of their childhood on these days as a community. And after 5 years, she's now got a community of something like 250 people, and they make these very delicious drinks that we sell for very expensive prices in art galleries, including things like Freeze, where we sell about 5,000 litres of beer every time the art fair comes into Regent's Park, and they sell these at the Tate. And when people drink the drinks, they recognise, you see these guys here? So these people are these people. So they're the same people, and the money from selling these drinks enables the project to carry on through the winter, so that these retired people, they meet each other in the libraries once every 2 weeks. They come together, they remember their childhoods, they bring photographs in, and this is all funded through health. This is not funded through arts money. This is about health and well-being, because the cost of providing NHS treatment to people who are unhappy because they're lonely is really significant, and it's really realised that that's something that the NHS have realised over the past few years. So this artist is working with these people, and that we're tracking them and following the impact on their health through working on this project.
There's two things I really love about this project, as well as the drink, which is very nice. One is what Adrian just described, of involving people in art doesn't mean busing them all to the galleries in the centre. In this case, it means busing them out of the city. But that the piece still gets a really broad audience within the art world. The other thing I really love is that first it began with the countryside, and it continues to go there every autumn, like in spring I think as well. But during the winter there's now an interest in this area in doing similar projects with parks. Sometimes involving storytelling, sometimes involving gathering, but very much in a suburban park, which before didn't have this sense that it was part of the the ecology either of the food system of that area or of the social system of that area for this generation.
This is a community centre. In the UK, municipal authorities are really struggling to keep libraries and community centres open, and this is causing real problems for people that live in social housing, where these used to offer a really important space for people to come together and to meet for all kinds of activities. So we work with municipal councils in lots of different ways, and one way that we work is that we act as custodians of buildings that the council, the municipal authorities cannot afford to run. So in this case, we invited a group of artists to set up an art school. This is a project called Open School East. It's very expensive to study art in the UK, and this is a one-year postgraduate MFA program, and it's very, very reputable now. It's now in its 5th year. This is the first set of students, and they study for 1 year in this community centre. They don't pay fees. They have a studio. They have teaching, but in exchange for that, they run a program. They help us become custodians of the building. So when they have a lecture, it's open to the public, and this is a lecture in the big hall in the building, but they also set up a radio station, studio, a reading group, and we now have this building up and running, and it's basically, again, not a financial arrangement with the council. It's one of us saving the money, because to keep this building closed was costing, it was Hackney Council, the name of the borough, Hackney, it was costing them something like £95,000 a year just to keep the doors closed. They had to pay for security, they had to pay a tax, so they now don't pay for that, but they let us use the building for free. And there's now lots of projects happening. This project's now moved to another part of the country, in Margate, because, well, there's reasons for that, we'll talk about that later. But again, it's an example of a non-financial transaction that's created a really positive relationship between a set of artists and a community who now have their community centre back, and they can use it when they want, and they can use it all for free, which is a nice thing. Have a drink.
This is a former library which is not in use for similar reasons. The library didn't close, it moved to a cheaper building to heat, a smaller one and an easier one to keep secure. And this building that was built in the 19th century as part of a series of London to open knowledge to the people was very much the idea of libraries in the 19th century in areas where education 6 to 12. It's a real shame to see this totally empty. And then the council had an idea which stayed with saying, haven't we done this before? Maybe that's the right thing to do. But we hesitated to refurbish it. It was built to be for the public, and it should continue to have a public function. So we worked with architects to build out these studios, but also to build them in such a way that the corridors have been so you have to walk through one studio to get to the next one. So it creates different kinds of collectivity, collectives of one space, so we get the right amount of rent that you keep a front room entirely for public use, and then that's being curated with us and then with some artists we're working with there.
So there's an artist in a studio. So the studios are open. They're not, the artists are not hidden away as they are in many buildings. One of the things we notice in London is that artists take buildings in areas that are cheap, and they change the locks of the doors, and the community who live in this cheap part of town never really see the artists. They're not part of that community, they're quite separate, and they're working away in secret. So this project we designed to make the artists very visible, as you can see. It's all glass and wood, it's not solid walls.
The other thing I'd say about the architecture of this is that a lot of it was done with volunteers, and so it gave them some of these carpentry skills, and it was done on the kind of budget that normally you could only afford kind of basic division walls, and that was about it. So there was a lot of volunteer time and a lot of design time put in to make it into a really good, without necessarily having any more budget. So
the artist all saved one of the nicest rooms in the library, which is the old children's library, and this is the room here. And we run residencies with artists in that space, and that space is now open to the public and has a program. This is a program, And recently we have our second artist in residence. We've been here for 4 years now. And this is called Rabbit's Road Press. So we've set up a community printing press in the Children's Library part of the building. And we work with local businesses to come in and do design and printing. It's all free of charge. So this is a magazine here for local market traders who work on the same street. And it's a little book about what they do. And we work with women's groups, market traders, the local businesses, and artists to use this space. And it's become a kind of reimagined version of what a library was there to do, which is a sense, yes, it's about reading, but it's also about bringing people together, providing space for self-education and learning.
And in January, we concluded an international artist residency, which was part V&A, part Create for another of our projects, which we'll introduce in a bit, and part Rabbit's Road. So it put Rabbit's Road on the map for a sort of West London audience. This is quite far in the east, and it also helped create kind of new groups of young, kind of early 20s activists, artists in the area who were working with this international artist from Mumbai, and they did a series of public artworks on fences and fly posting, producing material to put out in the area, working with local kebab shops, discussing recipes and memories, and then this was all displayed back at the V&A. This is a former industrial railway station. This is in the Docklands of London, and it's where material, coal and stone and probably concrete later on would have come into London and would have headed into the rest of England. It was empty. It was briefly a railway museum, and then it closed about 10 years ago. This project, we love it for many reasons, including that it's still live, but one of the reasons we speak about it here is that it failed, and we're still going. So we'd reached the point of agreement. We had about £1 million to buy it. We were in legal agreement almost to buy the area. We had support from the Mayor of London for a plan of artist studios and educational. Open School East was going to move here from the community centre that had become community centre again. And at the last minute it fell through, and they decided to sell it off to someone with more money for luxury housing. It happens, and it will continue to happen. So what we did, rather than, well, we cried a little bit, but rather than just stop, we said, okay, we have this money, and we have an area where we feel there are really clear needs. How can we work in some part of this site to deliver something? So we started looking at the tracks in areas that you can't really build on, and we're now negotiating a lease for 20 years on railway system going into London. So it's very fragile, it's hours and hours, but rather than be there on the waterfront in the old building, we're going to be building a feminist brewery here. There's an amazing brewer, award-winning brewer, who's worked for a number of big-name breweries in London and beyond, and she wants to set up her own space, and she'll be also training people who dropped out of school into the brewing industry, which normally is white, middle-aged, middle-class men who benefit from some fairly well-paid jobs that come out of the areas that are full of artists and the areas that are gentrifying very fast. So it creates, in part, an access to the jobs that happen around artsy places, but also it creates an ecology of training people every year in exchange for lower rent, and will that way get a community which has very high unemployment back into the London workforce.
So we talked today about testing, trying things out, about a series of experiments with spaces. We also talked about how things that belong to municipal authorities can be quite complicated to try and negotiate. We talked about an industrial site that some of you guys are working on today and tomorrow. We totally failed. Like, we failed so big on this project. We wanted to buy this. We spent a year trying to buy the building. We fell in love with it. And what we'll end up with will be completely something kind of more exciting and more unexpected. Encourage you in these kinds of journeys to embrace failure and embrace the stage of experimentation and trying things out. And when you hear a no, or where someone puts a barrier to This has been a really difficult project for us, but we feel like...
The other thing to say about this is whether it's architect list can change. We're working with some well-known artist group called Muff Architecture Art, and they really are now just building the cheapest possible shed, because a lot of the budget of this went into reimagining it, getting it back off its feet, getting it going. We're now going to fundraise to work with young people who've been involved in gang violence in the area to do the actual bit of architecture and art as an interior fit-out, which is about that conversation of what people need. But some of the negotiation was around stripping out the ego and saying, we think the area really needs something. You're not really going to get the piece of architecture you want, but you're going to begin a project that does something that's needed. And so you're a very interdisciplinary groups, and that is likely to happen as you go forward as well, that your roles will change.
We're very interested in housing. Housing is a really, really big focus for our organisation at the moment. It's the number one kind of issue for many people living in London, as in many other cities in the UK, the cost of living. Here we have a house, which is a farmhouse on the Becontree estate, which was in very bad order. It's the same story as the other ones. The council had this house, they didn't know what to do with it, it was costing lots of money. So we raised something like £500,000 and we restored this house. It was in really bad condition. It was a real problem for the council. They wanted to not destroy the house and build some more housing on it, but there was local people that felt it was an important historical place. It's actually a farmhouse, and we did a big capital restoration of this place, and we turned it back into a farmhouse, which was 4 rooms downstairs and 4 rooms upstairs. We turned it back into that. And it operates like a gallery, but it's a gallery in a home. And we think it's really exciting to think about what happens to you or a person when they walk into a space like this, like an art gallery. So a lot of people feel quite uncomfortable. You start sort of behaving in a way where you think you don't quite know what to look at. It's quite difficult, and it's like, oh, am I supposed to understand what's happening in here? So this is our gallery, and our gallery is a home. It has studios upstairs and bedrooms, and we invite international artists to come and stay. But downstairs it feels like a house. It's very comfortable, it's domestic, and this is in an area of East London in Dagenham, which we spoke about earlier, which has a big industrial history, but no galleries, very, very low levels of participation in culture. In fact, some of the lowest in the whole of the UK. So people from this part of London will not spend the money to travel in to go and see the British Museum or the Tate or go to the theatre. It's too much money. It's an area of real poverty. And we've invited artists to come from all around the world. We've just had an artist from, I think Diana mentioned, Mumbai, who's come to stay. So we have 5 artists that live in the house over the year, and they work with the residents in a domestic space downstairs to deliver projects that are really ambitious in terms of the art that's produced, but that responds to what people want in their area. And these guys wanted to have lunch, so we make lunch. And we have a lunch every Friday, and people come in and they meet the artists that are working there, and they have discussions with them. This is some of the people that live locally. This was during a filmmaking project that an artist called Patrick Goddard was making. You can sort of see his laptop there. And we're really interested in how a domestic space can be an exhibition space, and how people behave differently in a domestic space, and what that offers not just our local residents, but it offers the artists a place to relate to people in a very different way. We're now working on the garden, so we're turning this area into a big garden, and this housing estate here has a big tradition of outdoor space and gardens, and again, the building of this garden will be done collaboratively with artists and residents, and I think in April we're going to open the garden. They're on site now, digging away.
About the house, I'd say that it's a very simple plan, and it's a very simple concept in a small space. But what it does do is always want to put something next to something else that wouldn't always be there. So there's an international residency alongside a national one, alongside local artists as well working there, and then alongside a community program. And they're always interlinked. The ecology of that changes, who's there and what kind of work they do, whether they work with the V&A or whether they live around the corner. But I think that spatial diagram one could really also help with those of you looking at the Spagan plant, kind of how can probably luxury housing coexist with the kind of programs you feel the neighbourhoods around there need.
And this is where the house is on the plan. This is the Becontree housing estate, which was the biggest social housing estate in the world. It was built in 1921. It took 8 years to build, and they made 35,000 houses in this part of London. And we're working on a project now to celebrate the 100-year birthday for this housing estate. I think Pam is about to celebrate its 300-year birthday in 5 years' time. Good. So in 2.5 years' time, it's the birthday, 100-year birthday for this place, and we're thinking about how to mark that birthday. And we're hoping, with using all the relationships that we've got with the White House, that we can do a series of public realm improvements across the estate to make more planting with trees, to make playgrounds, to improve street lighting and paving. So quite functional things across the estate, but to do that with artists and with some exciting architects, so that this 100-year moment isn't just a big party, it actually improves the estate for the future. This is the Ford factory, which is what Dagenham is famous for. It's a big industrial area. It was a big industrial area. The Ford factory closed in the 1980s, and there was very high levels of unemployment on the estate, along with mass immigration, real problems with racism, the rise of the British National Party, which is a famously racist party that nearly took over the municipal authority in 2010. So there's a lot of work to be done on this estate, but we're really happy that we're there working, and we're looking to do something really transformational that talks about these problems. It doesn't try and eradicate them or push them to the side, but kind of acknowledges the success and the failures of this place, and looks forward positively to another 100 years. In the same borough, we had a swimming pool. This is a big new leisure centre, so it's got places for kids to play, 2 swimming pools. One of our favourite things in the world, is to find an artist that has never worked outside of an art gallery before and get them to work in a different place. That's one of our favourite things to do. And in this case, we work with an artist called Marvin Gaye Chetwynd, who's again another Turner Prize nominated artist. She was a mother, and she was talking to us about going to these play centres for kids. So they're normally like purple and yellow, and they're like the Pirates theme, and they're quite noisy, and they smell bad, and you bring your kids along, and the kids have a nice time, but the parents are having quite a hard time. So she made a very glamorous, very beautiful soft play centre. This is her 3 stories. It looks back to local history, and it's become an educational space, and it's a permanent facility. So this isn't artwork, but in a way, who cares if they know it's an artwork? It's a functional play space as artwork. And there's something like, in the 10 years life of this play centre, there's going to be something like 900,000 children that use it. So artists can make useful things, and we're really interested in how that can work.
And I find it really poetic that the art doesn't just come outside of the art gallery, but that it goes into a really ugly building that normally you'd find a bit offensive, like, oh, that was built by contract and there was no architect involved. And actually respecting the spaces that do get used the most, whatever they look like, I think is another really powerful thing about this project.
And around the corner from this project is our first, I guess it's our first housing project from scratch. So, as I was saying, one of the big reasons artists are struggling in London is they can't afford to stay in London because it's too expensive. It's not about studios, because studios are expensive, workspace is expensive, but the average salary of a practicing artist in London at the moment is something like £12,500. The average rent for a 1-bedroom house is something like £13,000, right? So artists are moving in big numbers from East London, from London itself, to places like Berlin, to Athens, to Margate, to Glasgow, which is really good for those places. It's a positive thing for those places, but we think it's not such a good thing for the creative energy and impact of artists in East London, which is really significant. So we managed to persuade a municipal council to give us some land. And this is land next to a railway station, Barking, which is like 20 minutes into Oxford Street from here. So 20 minutes on a train into the central London. So it's quite a good location. And they found a very small corner of land just here, where we persuaded them to let us build something.
There's a lot to say about this, but one of the things to say is that the brief again didn't begin with us. It began with the council saying, "Oh, maybe could you do some live workspace? So maybe 5 studios, maybe a few sculptors, and that will look really good for the 20,000 homes we're building in the borough, that we're also doing this slightly arty thing." And we said, well, you've got a huge social housing block next to it. You're going to have some luxury housing on this side. There's a kind of unmediated, there's a scale of change that is incredibly fast, and there's going to be a lot of feeling left out. There already is, and Adrian went through some of the problems that have been growing there for about 15 years, if not longer. So what this project does, it says, we'll create a really affordable housing for artists at 65% of the normal rent. So it can be afforded by young families, by people who want to have families, but normally in a precarious kind of London scene. If they've decided to stay, they can't. More importantly, that they can stay there long term and not become scapegoats for, as artists move into an area which is cheap and they need to live there partly to keep their practice going, and as they move on, both the developer and the council and the local neighbours say, well, the artists didn't stay, there's no problem removing them and doing something else entirely with this area. So the way we solved it, one more, is to say you have housing above, and on the ground floor you have studios that are shared between all of them, and also a centre for the community. It's an arts centre, but with a community focus, a bit like Open School East, running a series of public programme events for whatever people need and changing according to the needs. And the way we've done this is contractually. So we give always half a day a week for free to run the public programme. And by making it contractual, it means that forever, for 30, 50 years, the artists living there must always be committed to running this program.
So there's 12 artists building, we've now selected them. Each of those artists will give us half a day's work each week. So if you work that out, you end up with 5 or 6 days full-time programming in the public spaces on the ground floor, which are quite significant, and in a way, the building itself kind of will be very good value to the local council. So the local council are closing community centres, they're closing places for young people, they're really struggling to run any kind of social infrastructure in this part of the city. So we're figuring artists can do that. We'll just do a deal with the artists that are living here, and we're very hopeful that through this model we can encourage London to open these kinds of buildings. And after 30 years' time, when this really nice building is built, and it's a quite economical building, it's been quite cheap, it's something like £3.5 million to build. It'll be good quality, but as you can see, there's no frills, it's unfinished, so they can make the walls finish if they want, and do the kinds of things that other people might not want to do. So after 30 years, the local authority will have rent coming in from the building, which is already paid. They'll also have a community centre, which costs them nothing to run. So it's actually a kind of amazing deal, and we've just run our kind of applications for the artists, and we've had a lot of people wanting to live in this building. And we open in a year's time. We've now selected our artists. This is the man is an artist called Grayson Perry, who helped us with the selection, and we made the selection based on a number of criteria about housing needs. So there's about 5 families, like artists with kids living in here, and their contribution. So they made a proposal, and some of the artists want to do arty things. They want to run ceramics clubs for kids, and they want to do film clubs. But some of the artists have said, look, I'm a digital artist, I can't do anything that relates to my practice, but I'm actually a really good chef. And I can do like a breakfast club for kids who are hungry in the local area on their way to school, and I'll do that on a Wednesday, and then I'll carry on with my work for the rest of the week. So we've got a really interesting group of practitioners that are going to move into the space.
One of the criteria was about their understanding of and their interest in working with other people and working in the community. And so some of them aren't art school trained, about half of them grew up locally, often those are the same. And we really wanted that kind of mix, so that there'd be people who'd lived there for life and also people who would play big in the art world, also internationally. And that way the learning from both sides could make the community over the next 5, 10, 20 years a real hub for opening up the art world to the local community, but also to all of the artists living there.
So every month for one day, between now and this time next year, the building's being built, we're going to be meeting people who live locally, the local church, local youth clubs, people that live very close to the site, and asking them what kinds of activities they want to see, right? And that's something that we're seeing more and more in the UK, in museums and galleries, including places like the Tate, is that this idea of outreach, like reaching out into a community to drag people into your institution, co-programming, so actually collaborating with local people to ask them what that they would find interesting to be in a museum or a gallery, or in this case the White House, which responds to lots of local people's interests. So we'll be developing the program for our community centre for a year with our potential tenants, and it will change a lot over the next year.
One other thing worth saying about the architecture is that it's designed by designing out corridors, again, a bit like in the library. It's possible to have a 2-bedroom flat that can very easily become a 3-bedroom flat without you having to pay the extra rent for the 3-bedroom. So it doesn't assume that if you have more kids or as your mother moves in with you, that you would have to, again, move or find another house. It's a house that's also designed architecturally to try to be flexible and try to be generous.
And that's the building, and this is the ground floor, and I suppose this reflects our real passion for artists. We really love working with artists, but we don't think that they are magical creatures that need to be protected and given cheap rent just because they're artists. Like in London, we want to collaborate with artists to really reintegrate them into a position in the city that every municipal authority can really understand, can buy into, and I think that for us is the future for our work and the future of, I think, how art and artists will be living in London.
So in parallel to the first few years of this building running, we're also beginning to talk already to other councils, other municipalities, about how the model could scale up, about how it could look at other professions, about how it could become a network perhaps to meet some of their needs as well. And we'll be researching this, hopefully, if the money comes through, with a sociology professor, looking at the very, very simple question that is asked all the time: do artists cause gentrification or regeneration? Do they cause it? We know the answer is no, but we're really interested in what an academic paper would say about exactly the ways in which it's no and the ways in which it's yes, and also the flows of kind of anger and artist blaming that can happen because of this economy of cheap rent and temporary use of spaces.
And I think that's the end of our talk, and we can now answer questions if you want.
Да, мы потихоньку переходим к времени вопросов и ответов. И у нас пока не запустилось видео, но наша команда работает над этим, и как раз мы позадаем вопросы, а после этого послушаем видео. Посмотрим. У кого есть вопросы уже?
Пожалуйста, поднимайте руку, мы принесем микрофон.
Also, do we want to try the video again?
We're now installing, so we're putting our screen.
Так, кто готов? Если вопрос... есть вопрос?
Добрый день. Меня зовут Борис.
Одну минуточку сейчас. Переводчик.
Я хотел представить.
Да, отлично.
Добрый день. Меня зовут Борис. Скажите, какие мысли у вас возникли в Перми по теме вашей лекции? Спасибо.
You'd have to ask us tomorrow. We're in the middle of brainstorming them with people locally. I don't have any lightning brainwaves. I also think that's not, so I think we're really interested in coming here and sharing methodology, learning from you, testing to see how our often quite risky and quite open way of testing makes sense here. But we shy away from and find it quite difficult the sort of just landing in a place and saying, well, I've done this before, so I'm going to do this here. And in fact, it's something that even in East London, which we know quite well, we try really hard not to do things twice. So if someone comes to us and says, can you give us a new black horse? Well, no, you can see how to do it, check that it works in the area you're looking at, and please go ahead. But we're quite resistant to the ready-made model of the quick answers.
Еще вопрос? Но если пока думаю о вопросе, я могу задам тоже свой небольшой. Я сейчас задам. В Перми очень большой вопрос связан с развитием зелени. Как, вот, на ваш взгляд, можно устойчиво развивать зеленую среду через дизайн, через привлечение артистов, может быть, через работу с культурой? То есть как сочетается какая-то окружающая среда и культура?
Same answer, really. They can meet. We've spent 24 hours in Perm, maybe 30 hours. It's hard to see how green it is because to us it just looks white at the moment. But we can see there's quite significant parks, and there seem to be like more to us, like more outdoor spaces than we're maybe used to living in our city. We love working in parks. We love artists, like we mentioned Muff, and we're building a big community garden with them. We like the idea of co-designing with communities, and we noticed that in your research, Natasha, with Stroke, is that you had some very strong feelings from people that use parks to do as they want to go, and I think that's really, really interesting. I'd love to kind of imagine the way that the city is occupied and used now.
I'd say in the way, even when they're very full, and then what are their needs? There are a lot of parks. There are some amazing mountains for the connection to them, but what's kind of?
Maria, a participant of the workshop, actually I have a clarification concerning the house for the artists and the community. Do they sign a sort of a contract for a particular, during this particular period of time, if we use, and both of them are artists and they agree to kids and they are, or at some point they are tired of giving that weekly activities, what sort of outcome? Are they asked to leave the house? Are they asked to just move?
That's a very good question. We've been asking ourselves for a year or two. And a lot of our work has been around the tenancy. So one of the slides that I flicked through and didn't explain was one of our influences, which is a 1970s very beautiful Swiss building for sculptors. It was built just because the value of being a sculptor was seen as enough, that these sculptors in Switzerland should be given homes. When in the 1980s they became bankers and families and just happened to have some of the most valuable homes in the city, they continued the first people that the house should be for, as well as for supporting artists who choose to live there. Within this contract is for the community, and that it's really important that this doesn't become one more space that can no longer be used, that has to become a supermarket, that becomes a commercial rental space like so many others. So in answer to the question, yes, there's a tenancy, and the interview process as well said, like, there'll be a yearly review, and for as long as you can contribute half a day to the program, then you can be in the house. How you contribute that can change. It could be that you're also helping to coordinate lots of the artists. It could be that some of you are doing outreach to schools. But mainly, the focus is to have the model for having a civic centre that's free to staff. If you're ill or if you're pregnant, we've also built in. There are actually now 18 artists selected because there are artist couples as well, and there's enough of a time bank, enough extra hours that if people go and do a residency or are ill or have trouble with something, then that can be covered without making the program stop. The other thing worth saying is that the tenancy is for life, but it's reviewed every year. So it's not precarious, but if you choose to stop running the program, then it's not the right house for you.
Or if you stop being an artist and become a banker, then maybe it's not for you as well. So we're flexible, and we have to be quite strict, but we understand changing the life of an artist is people will go off and do residencies. So that's why we're thinking about this idea of a banking system where someone can take your time, and the artist we're going to look after the building for 2 years, and after 2 years we hope that with the governance arrangements being managed between the artists themselves, so it could be that some of the things that we set up will change over time. There are a few red lines.
The other thing is we've looked at also artists who will also be running this public program, and one of the things is fully insulated and soundproof double doors that can open up between the living rooms. So between a round of 3 living, either you can have a meal with 40 people, or you can have your homes. So we've also looked at building or designing collectivity into a very simple design. There's doors as well, so there can be more time outside. There's a public square, business unit, so that we almost look at different ways to support collectivity with the neighbourhood, with London, and then between flats, and also with
Здравствуйте, я хотел бы спросить вас, вот я работаете с художниками, прекрасно знаете, что художники тоже бывают очень разные. Прямо, если тему вашей лекции прочитать немножко не так, как что они, а есть ли, по вашему мнению, художники, которые не нужны городу? То есть вот реально не нужны, без кавычек. Если такие художники, кто они, по вашему мнению?
con artists.
It's a good question. I can't think of any artists that have done really bad things for a city. But actually, there are some. I don't necessarily like public art quite often. Like a lot of artists are so. I mean, they're a bit like architects, aren't they? They're so confident with themselves, and they feel so entitled to kind of plonk a massive statue. Like Damien Hirst did a big piece on a beach, and it was like 18 meters tall, and a woman holding a sword. So I think quite often like public art can be quite problematic, and I think the relationship with the municipality is quite difficult when it comes to public art. I also have to say, and I know that Pam is very famous for street art, and it's like people think it's super cool. Personally, I don't like street art. Like very personally, I live in Hackney for 20 years, and it's street art everywhere, and it's like Banksy and all this stuff, and tourists taking photos of it. And for me, I'm not like super keen on that. I don't always want to see art. I don't always want to see it maybe it's because I work with artists. So I don't think there are examples of artists doing anything really bad. I think when it gets into gentrification and these kinds of issues, so lots and lots of middle class, they change the locks on buildings, they practice their art, and they think, oh, we're having such a good time. And then inadvertently, people who run coffee shops in a cool area, and then people start cycling around drinking lattes, and then they go, all the rents are going up, and then the area becomes unaffordable. This pattern that you see in big cities, whether that's London, Berlin, New York, it's happened, and it's not, you can't blame the artists. You can't say it's the artists deliberately setting out to raise the rent levels in that area. But when you've got places, we talked about Hackney Wick earlier, which is next to the Olympic Park, when all of those artists got priced out, the landlords said, go away artists, we're selling your industrial building. No one, not one person who was living in social housing wrote to the municipal authority to complain, to say, oh, we want our artists to stay. Not even one letter, because those artists living in this cool area never met the neighbours. They never developed relationships with people living nearby. And I think for me that's an example of artists not being responsible, and the result of that is that their precarity, they're not protecting themselves in the city, so it's very hard for the municipality. The community didn't care whether the artists were there or not. So these things are quite complicated.
Yep. There's lots of things. I'm thinking a lot about taste and about, maybe it's not about harm, but there can be not asking challenging questions, which is maybe the flip side of the question. So where artists are perhaps doing big... They're not in conversation, and you can't be in conversation with everyone, and not everyone can be happy. But where that conversation isn't happening between art, I'd say that the art is probably fairly poor, even if it's very expensive. But I wouldn't call that harm. Just... Translate.
Next question.
Good evening. Thank you for this lecture. It's very actual for our city and region. My question is, can you explain the most strong examples in villages or the same countryside, what extremely changed life of the people on this area? It's maybe the same like what you explained about countryside for retired people, but maybe another examples.
So, an organisation that we really admire in the UK are called Grisdale Arts. Grisdale are in the Lake District in the north of England, which is a very rural, quiet area. It's actually, they have a farm, and...
Nadia, I think you're on the wrong channel.
They have a farm, and they moved there in, I think, 1989, something like that. And there's a very important art writer called John Ruskin that was the forerunner of the arts and crafts. It's actually very near John Ruskin where he moved to at the end of his life. And in the early 90s, Grisdale started inviting contemporary artists to come and stay on the farm and doing quite experimental art, quite difficult art. So one example is they put an advertising billboard into the woods and invited artists to make on the, you know these billboards that have lighting on them in the wood. Artists were climbing the trees and doing all kinds of quite crazy stuff in the village. And the villagers didn't like it at all. They got really pissed off with Grisdale, and they set fire to the billboard, and they started getting really upset with these artists that were coming to their village and doing all this annoying stuff. And what was nice is that Grisdale really listened to that, and they started thinking about this idea of useful art utile, which goes back to John Ruskin. So this idea of can art actually be useful in a rural community or indeed in life? Like, what's the use of art utile? And they started doing really useful projects for the village. So the village fair, this annual fair, no one was really coming to the fair. It was, 5 old ladies and a man with a dog, and it wasn't as good as it used to be in the 60s and 70s, and the kids from the village didn't want to come to the fair. So the artist said, can we run the fair? Right? So they started running the fair, and it became really good. There's a game called cricket that people love in the UK, they dress in the white, and the cricketers had a pavilion that was falling down, and so the artist said, well, can we come and fix the pavilion for you, and we'll do that. So there's a number of projects now in this village that the local people really love, and artists come there, and they've taken upon themselves this idea of useful art and being really part of this community. And for me, that's, I guess what we try and do in the city is a similar kind of thing to what they do. So if you want to look at an example, look at Grisdale, and they're doing some really exciting work now.
Thank you.
Здравствуйте, меня зовут Александр. И у меня вопрос про проект Бани, в первую очередь, за один пункт. Какая была экономика у этого проекта? Была ли какая-то бизнес-составляющая, или это было все сделано средством какого-то гранта, себя не упало, и после этого никак не существовало? Ну и, в принципе, про других проектов немножко, как они себя окупают в жизни. Спасибо.
Good question. So, The temporary project that was £1 in the bathhouse was all funded. It was all public money. So it was something like £200,000. It was a public project. The pound was almost like a symbolic gesture for people, and it was just something that was offered to the community for free. The model now is that the people that ran the massage, that ran the Tai Chi, all the exercises were all local practitioners. They were people that were employed on that project because they lost space for their businesses locally, because they couldn't afford the rent, so they were invited to be part of that temporary project. Halfway through the project, these local people, there were 5 of them, they were the ones that decided to continue the project and to set themselves up in a business in the library. So the project that they do in the library, the municipal authority don't charge them rent. So there's no rent, you have a space, it's about, I don't know, about this space here. And they raised some money, took a business loan and made 5 rooms in this space in the library. The council don't charge them any rent, which means that they can all run their little businesses, the guy with the sauna, the woman who does the massage, the pedicure guy, and they all run it really affordably, but it's not £1 anymore, it's like £5, and it's a little bit more expensive, it's still affordable, because it's low rent, they don't pay rent in the library, so they keep the prices down, and now they're all running these little businesses self-sufficiently, without any public money at all, and all the public purse are offering now is space in the library. So I guess that's a bit of a theme with some of the other projects, is that the municipal authority, we're not asking for money, we say we're not asking for money, we just want space, and we can prove to the authority that your community is benefiting from this activity, because whether it's opening a community centre or running the children's library room or the spa, so these are things that are of real value to the municipal authority, but all they're offering is space. Sometimes it saves them money because we're taking space that they can't afford to look after. We're looking after the space for them. So in fact, for them it's quite good. So that's one example, and then we talked about the workshop, which is just taking in quite a lot of money. It's turning over something like £400,000 a year now through membership. The drinks project is a little bit of public money, but mostly we're selling drinks, which is really good. And we're always trying to find ways of becoming a little bit more entrepreneurial after a few years. But it takes like 2 to 3 years, I would say, before you can really be self-sufficient on most of these projects.
And it also takes the testing that we've spoken about in the workshop. So the Barking bathhouse didn't intend to become permanent, but the other bathhouse we looked at, the swimming pool, did intend to open the building and almost do this with the eyebrow tape. And actually, protest groups or people asking for it to happen hadn't made it happen until it was open. Sometimes just having something to point at is really helpful.
Спасибо. У нас остается один вопрос и видео.
Спасибо большое за все, что вы нам сегодня здесь рассказали. У меня, наверное, вопрос, который продолжает немножко предыдущий вопрос. Но это, во-первых, я поняла, что многие ваши проекты предваряют большая работа с юристами, процесс согласования единоместно. И мне интересно, в первую очередь, инициатива по поводу проекта исходит от вас, или от местной администрации, или от местных жителей? Какая статистика вообще? И второй момент, это тоже финансирование. В основном это либо государственный бюджет, либо это деньги частных инвесторов, частного бизнеса, какое процентное соотношение в проекте. Спасибо.
Do the budget one first. So we have 7% of our annual turnover comes from the Arts Council, and 83% we raise ourselves. So we're quite efficient in terms of the relationship between Arts Council funding and the rest of our money. So we work with sponsors, so we have businesses that give us some money, we raise money, we do Kickstarter, we do all kinds of ways to raise money, but we try and keep the public money as low as possible. That's the ratio on that. And then your other question was, how do we start a project? projects. And I guess it's all of those things that you said. Sometimes the municipal authority will come to us and say, we've got this great big building, can you please take it from us and make it not cost us money? That happens. Sometimes an artist group will come to us going, we want to set up a pottery and we want to do stuff with kids, and we will help them with that. And sometimes we'll have an issue, whether that's gang violence or loneliness or something like that. And we'll start with an issue and then we'll be working around that issue in space. And with housing, that's something that we just can't ignore, because housing is the thing that's the biggest problem, not just for artists, but for anyone on low income in London. And we think this idea of changing the housing model is really fundamental, and it's not just for artists. So one of the things people ask us about the housing project is like, why is it artists that deserve special housing, or this kind of innovation? And for us, it just starts with artists, because one thing that artists are good at is they'll try something before other people. So we're really interested in health professionals having joint housing that's affordable, and maybe they work out time with people who spend all their money on childcare, sharing housing in different ways. So we're hopeful that other low-income workers in London can have other forms of housing that will learn from our project. So there isn't one answer to that. We start projects in like 5 or 6 different ways. But the thing we don't do, which a lot of arts organisations do, is that we're not here just to make artists' dreams come true. We don't really do that. So artists that just want to do something, we don't really do that. We're more interested in this relationship between artists and real people. That's what drives us.
Спасибо. И на этом у нас вопросы подошли к концу. Я надеюсь, что мы сможем посмотреть видео.
Translation as well. Amazing to listen to. And just a reminder that this project began with looking at the impact of a huge cultural project and the master plan of the park on the local neighborhood.
Thanks for having us.
Спасибо большое всем, что пришли. Спасибо большое нашим.
Все время я завтра работаю.